All right, so ready to jump into some of the top news coming out of India today. March 5th, 2025.
Definitely, yeah. Looks like it's going to be a busy one. We've got tech, cricket, international relations, you name it.
It's incredible how India always seems to be like right at the heart of all these global trends.
Totally agree with that. I think that's part of what makes it so fascinating to follow. It's a real microcosm of what's happening in the world.
For sure. Okay, well, let's start off with the business world. So Microsoft, they just got some good news from the Competition Commission of India, the CCI.
Yeah, they dismissed that complaint about Microsoft bundling its Defender antivirus software with Windows. Basically, they said no violation of fair competition, users aren't forced to use Defender, and lots of other operating systems do the same thing.
So a win for Microsoft in India's kind of growing tech landscape. But speaking of business, not every company in India is celebrating. What happened with Alderams? You know that really popular snack food company? I hear a deal went south.
It did, yeah. Blackstone, the big private equity firm, they were ready to buy a minority stake in Halderams, but it all fell apart. There was a valuation disagreement. Blackstone valued them at $8 billion, but Halderams insisted they were worth $10 billion.
Hmm. That is a pretty big gap. What do you think led to such a difference in valuations? Do you think it was brand perception or growth
Yeah.
potential, maybe market share?
I think it's probably a combination of all of those things. I mean, Halderams is a beloved brand, right?
Yeah.
Huge in India. And they've been expanding quickly, so they're probably very confident about their future.
And Blackstone, on the other hand, maybe a little more cautious.
Mhm.
Maybe they're kind of taking into account the global market and
Could be. And don't forget, there's another big player in the mix, Temasek. They're still in the running to invest, so this story isn't over.
definitely a story we need to keep our eye on. Speaking of things we need to keep our eye on, the Indian stock market, it hasn't been doing so great lately. What's going on with the Nifty 50?
The Nifty 50? Well, India's benchmark stock index just experienced its longest losing streak in 30 years.
Wow, 30 years. What are some of the factors that you think are contributing to this?
I think there's a couple of things. Global trade tensions are having an effect for sure, especially those U.S. tariffs. Sectors like IT, pharma, and auto, they all rely on exports. They're definitely taking a hit.
Yeah, that makes sense. The global landscape always affects the local markets. So is it all doom and gloom for the Indian economy right now?
Not necessarily, actually. There are some bright spots. Refiners, for example, they're benefiting from those lower crude oil prices, which actually is a result of those trade tensions we were just talking about.
Interesting. So it's kind of a mixed bag for the Indian economy as a whole. Okay, well, let's move on to something that's a little lighter, something that's always a crowd pleaser. Let's talk some cricket.
Always a good topic. We've got semifinals day at the ICC Champions Trophy, and it's exciting.
I bet it is. What are the big matchups for today?
Well, in Lahore, we've got New Zealand going up against South Africa. Now, both of those teams, they've won this tournament before, back in the late 90s. Back then, it was called the ICC Knockout Trophy.
So it's a real clash of the Titans. Any predictions for this match?
Well, with a batting-friendly pitch and, nice sunny skies in Lahore, I think we're in for a high-scoring game. Both teams have some really strong batting lineups, so it's hard to say who will win.
I'll be glued to my TV for sure. And while we're on the subject of cricket, we can't forget to mention India's win yesterday. They completely dominated Australia in Dubai.
Yeah, it was a dominant performance. KL Rahul's winning six was the icing on the cake, and Virat Kohli, as always, just a rock-solid performance.
He's a legend. Australia, they put up a good fight, but they just couldn't match India.
India's cricket team, I'd say it's a huge source of pride for the country right now.
Totally agree with you. Now, speaking of national pride, Prime Minister Modi's been pretty busy on the diplomatic front, right?
He has. He just met with Princess Astrid of Belgium, who, by the way, is leading a huge trade delegation to India.
I heard about that. Something like over 300 people, including some big business leaders and government officials. What do you think the significance of this visit is?
It shows the deepening ties between India and Belgium for sure. Modi spoke about limitless opportunities. They're talking partnerships in trade, technology, defense, even agriculture.
So a real push to strengthen economic and strategic ties. I wonder if this is partly driven by that current global trade situation we were talking about earlier. With all the uncertainty, maybe India is looking to solidify some alliances.
That's a really good point. India is really working on how it's positioned globally.
It's going to be interesting to see how these relationships develop.
Yeah, definitely. While things seem to be looking up with Belgium, there is a bit of tension brewing with the UK.
Oh, right. The UK government is asking for India to release Jagtar Singh Johal. He's that British Sikh activist who's been detained since 2017.
It's a complicated case, really. Lots of different charges, and he's actually been acquitted in some cases. Can you believe he was arrested during his wedding? But the UK government is definitely concerned, especially because of those recent acquittals.
It's a sensitive topic for sure.
Mm.
How's India responding to all of this pressure?
Well, so far they're saying that Johal is facing very serious charges and that the legal process has to play out, but it's definitely putting some strain on the relationship between the two countries.
It just goes to show that diplomacy is a delicate dance.
No doubt about it. Okay, so remember those U.S. tariffs we were talking about?
Sure.
Well, they're not just affecting the stock market, they're also starting to impact the steel industry in India.
I was wondering about that. What kind of impacts are they seeing?
It's interesting, it's like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, cheaper steel from other countries might flood the Indian market, and that could be good for the manufacturers there, lower their costs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lower costs usually leads to higher profits.
Yeah.
But what about the downsides?
Well, the cheaper steel coming in could really hurt the domestic steel production, potentially impacting jobs and hurting the industry overall.
So it's kind of a question of short-term gain versus long-term sustainability.
Exactly. And this all brings up a really big question. India's ambitious climate goals. You know, they've set targets for clean energy, and they want to reach net zero emissions.
Right, so if their steel industry suffers, it'll affect those goals.
Exactly. It's a complicated situation with a lot of moving parts.
It seems like that's a recurring theme in India today, from those tech giants to snack food companies, from winning at cricket to diplomatic challenges, and now the steel industry trying to deal with global trade.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the anxiety about cats in Kashmir, or their big plans to move towards a circular economy.
So much to cover. Looking forward to diving into all of that.
Always interesting to explore what's going on in India. You know, we were talking about some anxieties over cats in Kashmir earlier. That's a really strange one.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely one of those stories that you kind of have to read twice. There's like this panic among cat owners in Kashmir right now because of some social media rumors.
Yeah, I read about that. Apparently, people are saying cats are spreading some deadly diseases, even saying they can cause miscarriages.
Wow, that's pretty serious. And you know, it's crazy how fast this stuff spreads, especially in a region that's already, seen a lot of conflict and turmoil.
It really shows you the power of social media, right? Both the good and the bad. I mean, vets have been trying to reassure people, but some people are just really scared.
I get it. When you get anxious about something, it can be hard to let go, especially if it's about the health of people you love or even your pets.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a good reminder to, always think critically about what you're reading online and to get your information from sources you trust.
Speaking of sources you can trust, let's talk about something that's, a little bit more positive. India is making a big push for something called a circular economy. I'm curious to learn more about this.
It's a really cool concept. It's gaining traction all over the world. The idea is to reduce waste and reuse resources as much as possible. So instead of that old take, make, dispose model, it's more about reduce, reuse, recycle.
Oh, okay. So it's like a closed loop system. Everything gets used over and over again.
Exactly. And the Indian government is really behind this idea. They're saying it could bring in trillions of dollars and millions of jobs by 2050.
That's incredible. Sounds like they're serious about it.
They are, definitely. They're already doing a lot of things, new waste management rules, banning those single-use plastics, and doing a lot of research into turning waste into energy. They even want to host the World Circular Economy Forum in 2026.
So they're really putting their money where their mouth is.
Hmm.
What are some of the challenges you think they'll face trying to make all of this happen?
It's a big change, right? Going from a linear economy to a circular one. You need everybody on board, businesses, consumers, policymakers. It takes a lot of coordination.
That's a huge task.
It is, but the benefits could be huge, Less waste, saving resources, new industries, could even help with climate change.
That's awesome to hear. It's inspiring to see India kind of, stepping up and taking a leadership role like this. Okay, well, let's go back to politics for a minute. Prime Minister Modi's plan to change the parliamentary constituencies is causing a bit of a stir.
Definitely a hot topic. It's become a big issue, especially between the North and the South.
What is this all about? Can you explain, what it means to redraw constituencies and why everyone's so upset?
It's basically adjusting the boundaries of the voting districts based on how the population has changed. The goal is to make sure Parliament represents people fairly. But the southern states, they've been really good at keeping their population growth under control, and now they're worried they'll lose seats to the north where the population's bigger.
So they feel like they're being punished for doing a good job.
Exactly. They think their success in promoting family planning and education should give them more representation, not less.
That's a tough situation. How's the government dealing with this?
They're trying to calm things down, telling the South that they won't be ignored, but a lot of people aren't buying it. Leaders from the South are planning to meet and come up with a strategy, so this is far from over.
You know, it's a reminder that even in a democracy as big and diverse as India, finding that balance between representing everyone fairly and dealing with all the political stuff can be a real challenge.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, especially with the election coming up. Before we move on, we have to talk about this unexpected news from Pakistan.
Oh, yeah, the gold rush.
Yeah.
I was saving that for last. They found this massive gold deposit along the Indus River, right? They're saying it could be worth something like 80,000 crore rupees.
It's an incredible discovery. Could really change things for Pakistan's economy. They've been having a tough time lately, so this could be a real boost.
Almost like something out of a movie, right? Or a real treasure hunt story. But there are some things to consider, I imagine.
Of course, yeah. To get that gold out of the ground and refine it, they'll need a ton of investment, technology, and, they have to be really careful about the environment. And there's always the risk of illegal mining and corruption. It's something they've had to deal with before.
So it's a huge opportunity, but also a big responsibility.
You got it. They'll have to handle this very carefully. They need to be transparent, make sure there's accountability in the mining process, and use the profits to really help the country grow in the long run.
It's funny how sometimes the biggest challenges come not from having too little, but from having too much. Managing this kind of sudden wealth can be just as hard as dealing with an economic crisis.
It's true. Pakistan needs to play their cards right to make this a real success story.
High stakes, for sure. We'll have to see how it all unfolds. We've talked about so much today, tech companies, cricket, politics, the environment, even cats. It's been quite a journey.
And we've just scratched the surface, right? India's always changing, always evolving. There's always something new happening. I think that's what makes it so interesting to follow.
It does make you wonder, though, what does all of this mean for the future of India?
Well, it's clear that India is at a turning point. There are a lot of opportunities out there, but also lots of challenges. The choices they make today will really shape what happens in the years to come.
Yeah, I guess you could say that today's news is tomorrow's history.
It really is. And the story of India is still being written.
Each day is a new chapter, full of surprises, and I'm sure there will be plenty more to come. Wow. Thinking back on everything we've talked about, it feels like we've covered a whole year's worth of news, not just one day. That gold find in Pakistan, that's a big one.
Huge, yeah. It could completely change their economy. But, it makes me think about something we've talked about a few times today. How do you balance those short-term wins with making sure things are sustainable in the long run?
That's a question India is facing too, especially with the steel industry and all those tariffs from the U.S. Sure, cheaper steel might be good for business right now, but what about the effect on their own steel production and, those climate goals they've set?
It's a tough one. Economic growth versus protecting the environment. It's a global problem, not just in India.
And that whole thing with Microsoft Defender and the CCI, it shows how India is becoming more important in setting rules for these global tech companies. It's like they're really stepping up on the world stage.
For sure. And it's not just tech. That trade delegation from Belgium, the issues with the UK over Jagtar Singh Johal, India's definitely a bigger player now.
But they've also got a lot to deal with at home, too. Like trying to figure out those parliamentary constituencies. It shows how different parts of the country have different priorities.
It's a good example of how complex democracy can be, especially in a place as big and diverse as India. Figuring out how to represent everyone fairly and make sure the system works. It's a constant process.
And then you've got those kind of unexpected anxieties popping up, like that whole cat panic in Kashmir. It shows you that even with all the technology we have, information or, misinformation can spread so fast.
It's a good reminder that we all need to think critically about what we read and hear, especially online. With all the news and social media out there, it's easy to just accept whatever you see.
We've talked about tech, trade, politics, even cats. It's been a pretty wild ride through all the big news in India today.
And we've just scratched the surface, really. India is a country that's always changing, always adapting, always moving forward. There are going to be challenges along the way, but you can feel that energy, that optimism.
I think that's what makes it so fascinating. There are so many contradictions, so much going on, but there's also that sense of possibility.
The story's still being written, and we're all watching to see what happens next.
I feel like I've learned so much today. Your insights have really given me a much better understanding of everything that's happening in India.
It's been great talking about all of this with you. And to everyone listening, don't stop exploring, don't stop asking questions, keep up with the news. The world is a fascinating place, and there's always something new to learn.
Who knows, maybe next time we do one of these deep dives, we'll be back in India, uncovering more stories that surprise us, make us think, and maybe even inspire us.
Until then, stay curious.
And thanks for joining us on the deep dive.